This is about maybe the bold attempt of using AI to better understand glacier basal motion. And the motivation for this project was two-sided, actually. On the one hand, there's that general scientific question still about how glaciers actually slide. So this is still not fully understood. It's a combination of internal deformation of the ice body and basal sliding. And the first theoretical concept of glacier basal motion was proposed by Wertmann in 1957, who postulated that normal forces on undeformable bed undulations would lead to local shear resistance, but that otherwise the glacier bed would be completely frictionless, so that glacier basal motion is always a very smooth and slow process without any friction going on. And I think I skipped the entire historical overview about that discussion and come straight to the state of the art. So thanks to cryoseismology, so the ability to measure seismic data or collect seismic data actually on glaciers, so in the cryosphere, shows us that glacier basal motion is not always a smooth and slow process, but that it is interrupted by sudden stick slip events, as you can see here in the upper plot, which are, you might see that are often hidden in the background noise. But there was that great study of Greve and Walter last year, who showed using a borehole seismometer on Rhone Glacier, so in the Alpine region, that stick slip events happen actually all the time. So all the dots that you can see here in colors and in black are all stick slip events that you can observe over months. So they can be either very small on microseismic scale, but also quite strong and actually cause displacement of the ice body or of the ice surface of centimeters per day even. And so we know they exist, but it's very challenging to observe them. And for those of you, I guess most of you are in the field as you're in the SPIN network, so you know that usual challenges that come with collecting data like battery loss, GPS signals, which are unstable, but the cryosphere has some more to offer, which is like a very high noise level, for example. And especially in the Alpine region, where you have a temperate base of glaciers, in contrast to Antarctica, for example, where you have cold-based glaciers, you have a lot of water flow, what you can see here by glacier hydraulics. So you have water at the surface of the ice, in the ice body, and also at the glacier bed. And that masks the signals that you actually want to observe. And in our case, that would be stick slip motion here at the glacier bed. And in the best case, those signals would look like that. So we call them icequakes, actually. They are in the physics very similar to earthquakes, which can happen like individually, but also develop sustained tremor events. So we have multiple icequakes, one after another, that form a tremor. But often, if we measure seismic data on top of the ice, as borehole sensors are just very expensive and challenging to maintain, we often see signals like that. So we have a very high noise level, and often the signals that we actually want to observe are hidden in that seismic noise. So we have to think about clever approaches to uncover the signals that we actually want to see. And there were some methodological developments in the tectonic community, or also laboratory tectonic community. Mostly the group of Paul Johnson from Los Alamos National Laboratory and Chris Morone. And there was that very cool paper by Rouet-Leduc et al. Showing a laboratory fault experiment where they measure the shear stress of the fault, but also acoustic emissions. And they see if there's a relation between it using a machine learning model. So they try, based on these acoustic data, to predict the shear displacement or the shear stress. And as you can see that here, in blue, you see the machine learning model, which is a supervised model, a gradient tree boosting model. And in red, you see the mean shear stress. And this is a testing set, of course. You see a very high correlation of R2 is 0.9. And that's super great, actually. And they thought, okay, when that works so great in the lab, usually that should work great in the field, right? And they tested the approach on the Cascadia subduction zone. They used a 10-year-long, about 10-year-long record of seismic noise, and they had GPS stations as well. And here they used the same approach, but the acoustic emissions would be seismic data, and the shear stress would be the GPS displacement rate or velocity. And applying that gradient tree boosting model, they also got a very nice fit of model and data with a correlation coefficient of about 0.7, so that was actually groundbreaking, because it was never possible before to actually access the friction itself at the tectonic fault and then even to quantify it. And we wanted to take that even a step further and thought, okay, it works in the lab, it works reasonably well in the tectonic environment, so let's try it in the glacial environment as well, as we are so interested in what's actually going on at the glacier bed. And we used the 2018 Resolve dataset, which is actually from a team of different researchers from ISTER Grenoble. I would just name Philippe Roux and Florent Gumbert, as they are part of this project as well. And here they deployed a 100 node strong array in the ablation zone of Argentia Glacier, which you can see here indicated by the white triangles. And they also had GPS stations here indicated by the red triangles. So 4 of them are in the environment of the array. Then we also have another one at the accumulation zone, and 2 more stations at the bedrock close to the glacier. Then there was also a weather station and a water discharge station. And in our project, we focus on that very area here in the close to the glacier tongue, as there was the seismic array, and we want to use the seismic data actually as features for our machine learning model and predict displacement at the ice surface. So here you can see that in 3D. We have in gray the bedrock of that portion of Argentia Glacier. We have in blue the ice surface, and then the seismic nodes and the GPS stations. Now let's look at the machine learning model that we actually used. So gradient tree boosting is based on decision trees and random forests. So decision tree is probably something you're all familiar with, and the random forest is just a forest of trees, so multiple trees combined, where the results of each tree are averaged. And gradient tree boosting is an improvement of random forest in the sense that the trees are not trained in parallel, but iteratively, and they are trying to minimize an arbitrary loss function. So with each iteration, so each tree trained, we try to make our model a little bit better. And so what do we actually use as features and labels here? And for those of you who are not familiar with machine learning yet, in supervised machine learning, you usually have features and labels. Labels would be the parameter that you're actually trying to predict. And the features can be anything that you think could relate to those labels and could help you predicting this label in a way. And what we did is analogous to the studies before in the lab and in the tectonic environment, is that we used statistical characteristics of the seismic signal. So we took our continuous noise record, used a moving time window, and for each time window, we computed statistical characteristics as variance, kurtosis, different interquantile ranges, the mean, the skewness, and so on and so forth. And we did that for multiple frequency bands. We didn't do that for all 100 stations, as that would just blow up our feature space. We used 5 stations of the array with a high signal-to-noise ratio and a good distribution across the array. Then we also used some meteorological data, so temperature and precipitation, and also the water discharge. That could actually be a no-brainer that this somehow drives the glacier. And then we also used the beamforming catalog, and I will just explain in a second what I mean by that. And yeah, our target value is, our target label is the GPS velocity at the surface. And in the end, the main goal was for the machine learning model to uncover the underlying function between those features from the seismic data to the GPS velocity. And what supervised machine learning or gradient tree boosting also gives you is a feature importance in the end. So it tells you which of your features were actually most important for the prediction. And we hoped for that result to show us which are actually the factors that drive the GPS velocity. Yeah, let's talk about the beamforming catalog. So beamforming in general, I'm sure that term has crossed your career somehow already. Beamforming can generally be divided into plane wave beamforming. So you're looking at the source very far away from the array, and you have a plane wave coming in and try to locate the source. What we are doing here is matched field processing, where it's also a form of beamforming, where we look at spherical waves. So we are in the closed environment of the array. And in general, that works in the way that you correlate a data wave field with a synthetic wave field in order to locate a source position. And to go a bit more in detail, for the data field, we would compute the cross-spectral density matrix. So here you have the spectrum of one station I for a certain frequency, and you have the complex conjugate spectrum for the same frequency or frequency band for another station of your array. And then you can compute the cross-spectral density matrix for this station pair for a certain frequency, and that's what we do for all our station pairs, and that would represent our data field in frequency domain. So the synthetic data can be computed in different ways. We chose to just use a simple phase term. That's mostly what I do actually, to leave the search very, very open and not assume any source mechanism here. So we have also a spectrum from a simple phase term, which is dependent on the frequency and on a distance between a candidate source position and the receiver. So candidate source position is not like the real source position, because that's what we're actually going to find out, where that source location is. And so we need a set of candidate source positions, which we test. And you can do that based on a grid search. But what we did here is a Monte Carlo sampling, simulated annealing. It's actually just a free search over a certain space with an underlying heat map, trying to find the local minimum. And so in the end, we have a set of candidate source positions, which we match to our data wave field. And we do that using the linear Bartlett processor for the frequency band of interest. So here we have our data field, the cross-spectral density matrix, we have the spectrum of our replica vector, and the complex conjugate. And in the end, you derive that B value, which is a correlation value, and meaning that if that value is high, you have a very good match between your data wave field and your static wave field, and that this is the most likely position of your source. So long story short, we located many sources based on that array. And we did that for a moving time window of 1 second over the entire month of data that was collected by the array, and compiled beamforming catalogs, at least is what we call them. And we did that for 15 different frequencies between 5 and 20 hertz. And for each second and each frequency, we have the source position, so X, Y, and Z. We have the velocity, the beam power, which is a quality factor for the location, and the timestamp, of course. So as you can see here on the plot on the right-hand side, those are many, many sources. This is just a plot of 1 day, color-coded by time. So for machine learning, there are 2 things we have to keep in mind. First, we have to align the sampling of our features to our label. And our label is the GPS velocity with an hourly sampling. So that doesn't fit. And on the other hand, you have to think about the dimensionality of your model. So you have to, you cannot use endless features for a certain number of observations. And when we have an hourly sampling of the GPS data, that would give us about 800 observations for that 1 month of data. And that's what we, that's what we have. So we have to reduce our feature space in a way. And we came up with the following solution. We divided our glacier into 8 different voxels, with 4 of them being close to the bedrock and the other 4 being at the surface of the ice. And for each of these voxels and for each hour, to align with the GPS displacement, we count the amount of sources, and we also sum their beam power to have a quality factor as well. And that would be our features in the end that we can use for the machine learning model. So here's just a sum up of what our model actually looks like. So here you can see the observations with an hourly sampling, in the end about 800 of them. And then we have our statistical features like kurtosis, variance, and quantites, for example, for different frequency bands. We have the counted beam sources for each voxel and each frequency, their beam power, and we also have meteorological data. And all that we feed the model in order to hopefully predict and fit the GPS displacement. This is actually what the data looks like. So this is our label that we are trying to predict. And I know this slide looks messy. And what I would like to show you here is basically that we have, for most of the stations, a very very good signal and not many data gaps. There's just 1 station on the ice, so all the blue stations are always situated on the ice, and the red stations are situated on bedrock. And then we also have the mean of all on-ice stations and the mean of all off-ice stations or bedrock stations. And for ARC1 and ARC5, we have some data gaps or data missing in the end. That's why we do not consider them here, as those 800 observations are in general not that much for a machine learning model to train. So all the stations here with the black signal is what we tested and used for the approach. And that right-hand plot here on the upper side shows a station-wise correlation of the GPS signal. So we wanted to see if they actually behave similarly, or if there's a station doing something totally different than the others. And in general, we can say that they are nicely correlated. And then in the lower plot, I just plotted all the signals that in the end we are trying to predict. In red, you see the bedrock stations with a lower amplitude, but similar behavior than the blue stations that are a bit more noisy, of course, because they are on the ice and not on the bedrock. And this is what our features look like, just exemplary because there are many of them. So in black here in the upper plot, you can see a GPS signal again from one station situated on the ice. In gray, you see the air temperature nicely fluctuating by time of the day. In blue, you see the precipitation, and in the central plot, there are some statistical features, for example, from the seismic data. So again, we take the continuous record of one station, and we did that for 5 different stations, and you can see all the results of all stations here. And compute, for example, the skewness, which you can see here, or the interquantile range. And we just see that also they do behave quite similarly, which is good, that not one station is doing something totally different than another one. And in the lower plot, you also see the mean, for example, very stable for all 5 stations. And then, which is quite interesting, you see the counted beams in green. And this is now not per station, as we use all of the stations, of course, to locate our sources. This is showing the different voxels. So we had 4 of them being at the surface of the glacier and 4 of them being at the bedrock. And you see that that really differs and that you have much more going on in a certain voxel compared to another one. Yeah, this is now the hyperparameter study that is behind that. Don't get lost in it. It's just that for all the different hyperparameters that you use to guide your machine learning model, like for example, the max depth, we will just stay with that example because it's the easiest. If you think about the decision tree, it has it has the branches and then it has nodes. We call them children nodes. And in the end, you would have the leaf of the tree, which gives you the prediction result. And the children nodes can have multiple levels. So you can have just only 2, but you can also have 5 or 10 or whatever. And this is what the max depth is about. So you have to give your model a value of how deep the trees actually have to should be in your training. And what you see on the x-axis is that exact search. So we are searching for the best hyperparameter actually for different preprocessing applied to our feature space. So we always have the raw features that I just showed you in the plot before, but we also have some scaling that can be applied, some quantile transformation, then a PCA, which is P, and R, which we the random forest regressor, and then different combinations of it. And we just wanted to see if the results or the hyperparameters actually change depending on the preprocessing. So if preprocessing has a strong effect or not. And apparently it does have a strong effect, and it changes a lot when preprocessing is applied. So whenever we apply some preprocessing, we also have to change our hyperparameters. And here are actually the results now with all that different preprocessing and hyperparameters applied. So you have here results for all the GPS stations that I showed you on the map. And the y-axis shows you the correlation coefficient. So actually, so for the testing set, so this is actually how well our model fits the actual data. And if you look at the values, not great. And this is, yeah, something we deal with right now, or we're trying to deal with right now. So as you can see, we sometimes even have negative correlations and very, very low values. The best that we found so far is a correlation coefficient for that ArcG station, which is situated in the really on top of the glacier. And it has a correlation coefficient of 0.34. And also the mean of all on-ice stations gives a very good result when we do not apply, no, it's not here. On-ice mean, yeah. No, I think there's something wrong. I will show you the result. But it also gives a good result when we average just all on-ice stations. So here's actually the result that we have so far. So we have here on the y-axis the velocity that we try to predict, and x is just time, so that 1 month of data. And we use 50% of the data for training and the other 50% for testing. And what we see here in the training section, that we have a very good correlation coefficient of 0.9 and the testing of 0.331. And if you look at the signal, you see, or if you look at these two plots, you see that the low frequency part is actually not bad. So the long-term behavior isn't is somehow captured in the model. But what really seems to be difficult for the model is the high frequency part. And sometimes we even have a reverted signal. So sometimes it's even flipped and actually goes in the opposite direction. That becomes a little bit more clear here. This is the average of all on-ice stations that we're trying to predict. And you can see again that the low frequency is captured quite nicely. But again, the high frequency is very difficult, apparently. And yeah, before coming to my conclusion, I would like to invite you already to discuss that with me. If you have some ideas, what we could try, because at the moment it feels like we're a little bit stuck, and might be possible that this is just not working well, unfortunately. Or if there are some things that you could try. So when something comes to your mind, please approach us. I would be happy to hear that and discuss that with you. Yeah, my conclusion is also, because of that, not very positive, I'd say. So we can say that, yeah, the longer term behavior is captured okay to nicely, but that we missed the high frequency part. And what I wrote, what I have in gray here, is actually what we would like to see. No, it's not only what we would like to see. We see that the beamforming catalog is quite important. We see that in the feature importance, but it's not really valid as our correlation coefficient is so low. So somehow it does help the model to predict, but still the prediction is not very good. And if that would be more valid, that would reveal us active areas in the glacier, because that was the intention of dividing it. So we have those different areas, and we see in the feature importance that there are certain areas, actually they are closer to the glacier bed, which drive the model, but still prediction could be better. Yeah, there are some general issues, of course, coming with that data set, as that 1 month of data is great for the glacial environment for such an array, but for a model, not much to train on, especially when the GPS has a sampling of 1 hour, then there's just not many observations. So that becomes problematic in terms of model dimensionality and sampling. And also the spatial coverage of the glacier is not the best, as we're just having a part of the glacier and we cannot observe what's going on in the glacier-wide extent. So yeah, what's next? Of course, we will try to improve that. But also there's currently a DFG proposal under review that I just saw is now in the decision process. So fingers crossed. And there we will look at, hopefully look at the dust data set from Rhone Glacier. Maybe you have heard about that data set because it's quite unique. And that project was led by Fabian Walter and Andreas Fichtner and their groups. And they equipped the entire Rhone Glacier in Switzerland with a dust cable. Also had some seismic stations here and GPS stations. And we will try to test the same approach based on that data set. Yeah, and then thank you for your attention.